What's up guys, this is Gungjo and I'm back with another video. Today what I want to put together for you is a tips video for Rogue Company. Now I've been playing a ton of third-person shooters over the last 10 years with Gears of War, The Last of Us, Ghost Recon, Uncharted 4, all of these games are third-person shooters with some similarities to games like Rogue Company. And the way I see people playing this game is as if they've just hopped from Call of Duty, and if you're going into a third-person shooter, that becomes a problem. A lot of players that I see playing this game are dying because they're playing it as if it's an FPS, as if they can just run around corners and if they can just sprint around all the time, and that isn't going to be something that they get punished for. So the first big tip that I would say in Rogue Company to improve as a player is to kind of embrace the fact that this is a third-person shooter. Be aware of the fact that you can see around corners and so can your enemy. So that means that just because the way ahead looks clear doesn't mean it necessarily is. And it also means that every time you approach a wall, every time you approach a corner, you need to have your camera shouldered to the appropriate side so you can see as much past that wall as possible. And that also means that when you're about to aim and peek someone, you're not overexposing your own character when you do so. So something you'll see in the gameplay in front of you is that every time I'm moving, I'm changing the shoulder on the camera. Every time I'm moving piece of cover, I'm changing my shoulder on the camera. So this affects how you move throughout the map, it affects how you're moving the camera, and it affects the angles you take. So one thing to be really aware of when you're playing this kind of game is that, like I say, just because it doesn't look like someone is there, it doesn't mean someone can't see you. So you need to be mindful of all the different angles that someone could be present in, and the very real possibility that when you overexpose yourself, when you step out into the mid lane on one of the maps, then someone might just peek out from a wall and down you. And that doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but for me, this kind of cautiousness adds a lot to the tactical experience of these third-person games, so it's something I really enjoy. Now, what you need to realize when playing these games is means in which you can figure out an enemy's position without taking that risk. You need to know where enemies are, and then when you have that information, you can fight them on a level playing field. And there are various ways that you can do this. Like, one thing you can do is you can take advantage of the operators in this game that have abilities that reveal the enemies. Characters like Talon and Glitch, for instance, they show you where enemies are or show you that enemies are in your nearby radius. So using Glitch's scanning ability, for instance, it will tell you the names of players in your circular zone. And using that, you can infer where an enemy is, because, for instance, if you know the route you've just taken, then you know enemies aren't behind you. And that means that you can infer that the enemies are ahead of you in the position, likely behind the next corner if their name is appearing. And footsteps are another big factor here too. Footsteps are really prominent in Rogue Company, and you can always pinpoint where someone is, to the point where I can pre-fire a corner and shoot them as they come around because they're running or walking even. Now, obviously there are characters that have silent footsteps, and that's something that you should take advantage as well, and you can reduce your noise by crouching too, but you can always be aware of which characters have silent footsteps. It's Talon, Glitch, Dallas, Lancer. I think those are the only 4 characters that have silent footsteps. So you can look at the opposing roster and you can think, oh, okay, so there's one character on their team that potentially has silent footsteps. I might need to be cautious for them. And they probably won't have that perk in the first round either. So on the first round of either Strikeout or Demolition, everyone is going to have noisy footsteps. Most likely. It's possible in Strikeout that you could purchase the silent footsteps instead of your lethal, but most players will go through their lethal instead of the perk. So on that first round, you can really rely on the footstep audio to kind of give you information about where your opponents are. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is a strategy that requires a mindfulness of the fact that it is a third-person shooter and the fact that they can see you behind a corner, is that you can test the waters before pushing an angle. You can peek just a little bit to see if anyone bites, basically. See if anyone shoots back at you. See if you hear any footsteps as someone rustles around a corner. This is a really effective strategy in ensuring any push you make isn't going to lead to you getting downed instantly because there's a guy that you weren't aware of. You kind of peek a corner, have a look, maybe even fire a few shots. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I pre-fire the angle that I know an enemy is likely to be at because I'm anticipating them to peek. and if they don't appear, then it's likely there's no one there at all. The other thing just comes down to map knowledge. Like, you know on Demolition and Strikeout where people can get to within a certain amount of time from spawn, so you know the angles that they are likely to have approached within that time period. So for instance, the first half of your map, you don't have to worry about those angles. You don't have to worry about someone being in that first half of the map because they can't hit that point in time before you were there. So there's certain things that you can be less worried about when moving around the map. Similarly, if you have a bunch of teammates in front of you, it's very unlikely there's an enemy in between those two positions, in between you and those allied players. So that is just a really huge factor, just understanding that this is a third-person game and playing it like it's a third-person game. I've heard people like criticizing me for peeking an angle abruptly and killing them before they could react. And it's like, if you want to play Call of Duty, if you just want to run around and not think about the possibility that someone might be observing you as you sprint around the corner, then you really are playing the wrong game here, and you can't expect to do well at Rogue Company. You really can't expect to do well at Rogue Company. Like I said, this is something I actually have, over the years, enjoyed about third-person shooters. It brings kind of a tactical feel to these games that isn't present in first-person shooters, where you can just sprint around corners and just simply react to what you see. So it's something I really enjoy and I've adapted to, and I think making sure you're aware of these kind of third-person principles will help you improve greatly as a player. So that's the first tip, kind of like playing at the advantage of that third-person camera. The second tip relates to this as well, and that's being mindful of your angles. Like, when you're playing the game, it's somewhat helpful to even imagine you're playing like, you know how games like Metal Gear and things like that have a cone of vision for the enemy detection radius? Imagine when you're playing a game, if every player on the map had a cone of vision, and then that's the angle that they're able to see at any one time. And when you're moving around the corner, when you're stepping into a gunfight, you need to be aware of how many angles you're exposing yourself to at any one time. And in principle, you want that to be only one angle. It isn't always possible, and sometimes you do need to take risks, but you need to minimize your exposure to multiple angles and minimize your exposure to multiple enemies at any one time. So that means being really cautious with your positioning and being really mindful of the enemy positions and allied positions as well. So something that I see a lot of players doing wrong in this regard is you get like 2 or 3 people trying to cover the same angle. And yeah, sure, you can put more firepower down a lane if you all cover the same angle, but you're also all going to get fragged, and you don't have any coverage of the other angles on your side or behind you that are going to cause a problem if the enemy team flank. You need to be mindful as a team of the angles you're covering and try and maximize your coverage on the different angles on the map while minimizing your exposure to the opponent's angles. And it's that kind of strategic battle that's constantly at play here in these shooters. And if you're not playing like that, you're just going to find you're getting flanked all the time, your teammates going to be picked off one by one, and with each teammate that goes down, the number of angles you have covered is reduced, so you become even more and more vulnerable. So in a 4-person game, one guy going down, it's very easy for that to snowball, because say a guy goes down behind you, then suddenly that behind angle isn't covered anymore, right? And that means one of you at front has to pull off the front angle to look in that direction, otherwise you die. And that means that front angle is weaker as well. That means another angle not being covered, so it gives your opponent more and more opportunities to take opportune angles and expose the vulnerabilities in your team's positioning. So that's a really big factor, is just being mindful of all of the angles that your team have and where you expect the enemy positions to be and the angles you expect them to have when you're making any sort of push or maneuver in the game. And that might create a sense of kind of paralysis when you think about that. It might be kind of overwhelming. So you still have to take risks, you still have to be moving forward and moving towards the objective, and you have to sometimes move into angles or move through positions that the enemy might have an angle on already, and you need to be ready to take those risks. But it's not about avoiding all risk, it's about reducing risk as much as possible and not making stupid decisions that automatically get you killed because you kind of disqualified yourself from a gunfight because you've chosen to run into an angle with 3 enemies already overlooking it. So another big factor in Rogue Company that's quite unrelated to the previous 2 is your purchasing strategy in the game. I see a lot of people playing the game, either streamers or YouTubers or just people I'm playing with, and the only thing they're buying are upgrades on their primary weapon. And in many cases I think this is a big mistake, because if you look at the profile of each character, you'll see they have some very unique traits to one another, and you can see that they have a very distinct playstyle that can be achieved with a combination of perks and weapon upgrades. So for instance, if you take Scorch, she has some really remarkable perks with her shotgun where she can down a player and immediately reload the shotgun. The vulnerability of the shotgun is that it's only double barrel, so you only get 2 shots. But if you down one player with it, with the perk active, it will immediately reload. So you negate that disadvantage of having the 2 shot. So for a character like Scorch, I really think if you're using the shotgun, then playing into her perks is actually a stronger strategy than immediately upgrading the gun, because it provides a bigger boon to your combat efficacy than the gun upgrade would. And the same goes for characters like Talon and Glitch. Like the Silent Footsteps perk is possibly better than the gun upgrade because it means you can push different angles and you can approach different positions much more stealthily, especially with Glitch, for instance, because you have your radar ability, you have your hacking ability that can see around corners, that you can figure out where the enemy positions are. And with that and the Silent Footsteps, it means you can make a play safely. It means you can make a flank and you can know if anyone's going to intercept it at any one time. And as you're going around with your kind of hacking ability out, you can say, oh, this is clear, I can make a free push on the enemy team on this flank because they're not covering this angle. And that's what makes Glitch really strong. It's this combination of abilities and perks that I think a lot of players are sleeping on at the moment. So don't just upgrade your gun. Think about your character's strategy and what you want to achieve with their game plan, and think about the perks and how they come into that. Obviously the gun upgrades are very valuable as well. The lethals are also super valuable. And one of the ways in which you're kind of displacing enemies from these very strong positions is using those lethals. So the lethals are a big one to consider as well. Like typically in my games, I'm starting by buying my primary weapon, then my lethal, and then a perk. That tends to be the strategy that I'm going for. But I'll often hold off on getting the final upgrades on the gun before I've got some of the perks that let me get my playstyle really going in the match. Another piece of advice relates to the lethals in the game. And these are so incredibly effective and an important part of your game plan that it really can't be understated how important these lethals are. Obviously, as I've mentioned, this is a third-person shooter, which means that people are going to be peeking corners on you, and lethals are the means in which you can negate that advantage for players. If you know the angles that players are going to be playing, if you know where people are going to be peeking, then a frag completely negates that. A cooked frag can bounce around a corner and immediately destroy an enemy that's holding a particular angle. And by playing the game, you're going to learn the angles that are more prominently used, and also just by observing the gameplay in an individual match, you learn the behaviors of individual players and where they're likely to take up an angle. So you can get some really strong plays just learning those angles and learning to displace those players and kill them using your lethals. So I really wouldn't sleep on the lethals. I mean, I don't think many players are. I think players do value lethals, but I also wouldn't throw them out frivolously. I see a lot of people just throwing out their Semtex randomly onto an objective, or throwing out their C4 randomly and just hoping someone will walk around the corner onto it at some point. You should have a game plan with your lethals. You should be thinking about the angles that opponents take and thinking about how you can use your lethals to displace them from those angles. And relating to that, like when an enemy dies, they drop all of their weapons on the floor. So you really should be taking advantage of that, whether it's in Demolition or in Strikeout. When an enemy dies, they're going to drop their primary and any lethals they were carrying onto the floor. So if you don't have your lethal available, pick up theirs. Pick up their grenade, pick up their Semtex, pick up their C4, and take advantage of that. And this is something that really helps you snowball as a team in Rogue Company. At the moment, most of the characters have a vulnerability in one area or another based on the weapon choice they make. For instance, if you're Scorch and you pick her shotgun, then you don't really have any really good mid-range efficacy. You can use her pistol, but the time to kill on that is still lower than most ARs and lower than the SMGs even. So you really are a vulnerability there when you take mid-range angles and mid-range positions. So you can negate that angle by making your first kill a close quarters kill, and then most of the time the guy you kill is going to have a mid-range weapon or an SMG, which offers more mid-range capability than anything you have. So you can kind of negate your disadvantages by making use of other people's equipment. And also make sure you pick up their lethals as well, because like I say, you use your lethal to kill a guy, you can take his lethal, and then you're not at a disadvantage and the next time he comes around. You can use that lethal again and kill that guy again or kill someone else again. It's a really effective way of kind of snowballing as a team, getting stronger as you kill people. Take advantage of their equipment, guys. Especially if you see a shotgun, and I will say, like, one big factor is if you're using like an AR and you kill a guy who has a shotgun, then suddenly you've got like a really capable mid-range gun and a shotgun. for free. You are a huge advantage on any gunfight. Like, you can take mid-range fights and then you can kind of look vulnerable and they go around the corner and bam, you shot at them. And they don't expect it either, that's the thing. Because they're looking at your class, they're looking at the weapons that you have available to you, they're gonna be thinking, oh, he's a mid-range player, he's gonna have this gun and this gun. He's not gonna be able to deal with me if I rush around the corner with my SMG, and then suddenly you've got a shotgun or Uzi or something like that. So yeah, take advantage of the weapons that drop on the floor. My final piece of advice is to really think about your character and weapon picks in the game, depending on the kind of map and mode that you're playing. And so obviously once you pick your character, you're locked in. You can't just switch character like in a game like Overwatch, so you can't make those mid-match adaptations once you're in the game. So if you make a wrong choice early on, then it's going to be difficult to recover from that. I think all of the characters in this game are viable, but there are definitely some that are stronger on some maps and some that are weaker on some other maps, as well as in certain game modes. For instance, Talon maybe isn't that strong of an attacking character as he is a defensive character, because it means on defense you can get your reconnaissance scanner set up ahead of time, but on attack you're using it more aggressively. And the enemies have much stronger opportunities to shoot it out and negate your value there. So, you know, that's why on attack I often play Glitch, and on defense I often play Talon, and I switch between those characters personally. The other thing is, depending on the mode you're playing, your abilities work differently. So in Demolition, you only get one use of your ability per round, but in Strikeout, your ability recharges. So using Talon as an example again, in Strikeout, Talon's scanning drone recharges, which means you can cover multiple angles with it, which in my opinion makes him much stronger in Strikeout than he is in the other modes, because over the duration of a Strikeout round, you can get 2 or 3 scans up, which means you can cover like almost every angle onto an objective. And that's a very strong play that he doesn't have opportunity to see come to fruition in Demolition. And the same goes for, you know, different characters like Trench. Trench in Demolition has 2 potential objectives to defend, which is, you know, he's still effective in that position, but you only have 1 barbed wire, so you need to be careful where you place that down and which objective you choose to defend. But in Strikeout, there's only 1 objective, so Trench suddenly becomes a stronger character here, and you can adapt your character picks based on the mode to play to that advantage. Now, outside of your character picks, you also have the weapon picks within a character, which do afford some kind of mid-match adaptation if you think things are really going wrong. And that's something I would say to keep on the cards as well. Like, obviously it hurts to buy the other gun, but if you're dying every time, it could be worth changing up your strategy mid-game and catching your opposing team off guard by spending the money on a different kind of weapon. For instance, if I'm playing Scorch and I feel like the enemy team's got my number with the shotgun, then I might switch to her SMG and just try and support my team more on the mid lane angles and things like that. And by changing that playstyle, you can really change the outcome of a match. But yeah, some of this advice might sound quite obvious, but I see a lot of players not doing any of these things when playing a game. You know, making poor use of your lethals, not taking opportunities to pick up weapons on the floor that could benefit your playstyle, not taking advantage of the perks in the game, which as well benefit your playstyle greatly, and, you know, not playing like it's a third-person shooter, not being aware of your angles and not being aware of how you can use the third-person camera to your advantage. Those are really big things that are going to hurt how you play in Rogue Company, and hopefully this advice is going to help some players, especially those who are less familiar with third-person shooters with a shoulder switch mechanic. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I'm going to be playing a lot of Rogue Company. I'm going to put some character videos and things like that as well. This has been Gung Joe. Catch you in the next video.
Right, I'm going to sit out for one. Gotta go make meal prep for dinner. I'll send more chat though.